Assassins are on the stairs. Their swords are drawn. Their target is asleep upstairs, the man destined to break the shogunate's power. And the only person who can save him is a 25-year-old woman, naked, clutching only a robe, standing between a bathroom door and a revolution. Her name was Narasaki Ryo, though history would call her Oryo. His name was Sakamoto Ryoma, the most wanted man in Japan. This is the story of the Teradea Inn, the night of March 9th, 1866, and how the fate of a nation came to rest on the split-second decision of a woman with nothing but a robe and a scream. To understand the weight of that moment in the hallway, you must first understand the man in the upstairs room. Sakamoto Ryoma was not born a revolutionary. He was born a nobody, a low-ranking samurai from the backwater Tosa domain, with no wealth, no powerful family name, and a future that stretched before him as flat and predictable as a rice field. But the year was 1866, and Japan was breaking. For 250 years, the Tokugawa shogunate had ruled with an iron fist, locking the country away from the world. Now, American black ships had forced the ports open, and the old order was cracking. And in those cracks, a man like Ryoma could become someone else entirely. He left Tosa becoming a Ronin, a masterless samurai. This made him a criminal in the eyes of the law, but a free agent in the eyes of history. He studied Western gunnery, navigated the dangerous political underworld of Kyoto, and began to form a radical idea. The shogunate was weak. It could not protect Japan from the foreign powers circling like hawks. The only solution was to tear it down and restore power to the emperor. It was treason. It was a death sentence. And Ryoma became its most eloquent salesman. By early 1866, he had done the impossible. He had brokered a secret military alliance between the Satsuma and Choshu domains. These were two of the most powerful clans in Japan, and they were historic, blood-soaked enemies. Bringing them together was like convincing two rival empires to share a throne. This alliance would become the engine of the revolution, the hammer that would finally shatter the shogunate. And the shogunate knew it. They knew a man named Sakamoto Ryoma was the architect. They just needed to find him. He was a ghost moving between safe houses. His favorite was the Teradea, an inn in the bustling port town of Fushimi just south of Kyoto. It was run by a formidable woman named Ados who had a soft spot for lost causes and revolutionary dreamers. The Teradea was more than an inn. It was a nerve center. Messengers came and went. Maps were spread on tatami mats. The air smelled of ink, green tea, and conspiracy. And it was here that Ryoma's path crossed with a young woman named Narasaki Ryo. Everyone called her Oryo. She was 25, and her life had already been shattered by the very regime Ryoma was fighting to destroy. Her father was a samurai who had been arrested and executed during the Ansei Purge, the shogunate's brutal crackdown on political dissent. With her mother ill and destitute, Oryo was facing a life of crushing poverty or worse. Atos, a friend of her late father, took her in. At the Teradea, Oryo worked not as a maid, but as Atos's adopted daughter and apprentice. She was beautiful, with a quiet intelligence that missed nothing. And she was trapped, a daughter of the samurai class now serving sake and sweeping floors, a living reminder of how the shogunate consumed its own. Ryoma noticed her, not just her beauty but her bearing, the sadness in her eyes that mirrored the nation's own. He was a wanted man carrying the future of Japan in his satchel, but he would sit in the inn's common area and talk to her. He told her about the world outside, about his vision for a Japan that was strong and free, where birth didn't dictate destiny. To Oryo, who had lost everything to the old rules, his words weren't just politics. They were a promise, a possibility. He spoke to her like she was a person, not a servant. In a life defined by loss and duty, Ryoma's presence was a window left open in a stuffy room. The bond was quiet, built-in glances across a room, in the extra care she took preparing his tea, in the way he would always thank her by name. He was under immense pressure. The shogunate's police, the infamous Shinsengumi, were hunting him. Every creak of the floorboards could be an assassin. Every stranger at the door could be the end. His only protection was his loyal bodyguard, Miyoshi Shinzo, and the secrecy of the Teradea itself. Yet in this pressure cooker of fear and ambition, something gentle was growing between the revolutionary and the innkeeper's daughter. On the evening of March 9, 1866, Ryoma was exhausted. He had just finalized the last details of the Satsuma-Choshu alliance. The deal was done. The revolution now had its army. He should have been celebrating, but a deep weariness set in. The weight of it all. He retired early to a second-floor room with Miyoshi on guard. Downstairs, the inn settled into its nightly rhythm. Oryo, her chores finished, decided to take a bath. The La Furo asterisk, the traditional Japanese bathhouse, was a separate wooden building in the inn's garden. It was her one moment of peace in the day, a place to wash off the dust and the memory of her father's fate. She slid into the hot water, the steam rising around her. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire heating the tub and the distant murmur of the Kamo River. She closed her eyes. Upstairs, the man who had shown her a glimpse of a different future was sleeping, unknowingly at the peak of his danger, for the shogunate had finally found him. A squad of armed agents from the Fushimi magistrate's office had traced him to the Teradea. They did not come to arrest him. They came to silence him. They surrounded the inn. They moved with silent precision, katanas already loosened in their scabbards. The front door was guarded. The garden gate was blocked. Their orders were clear: leave no witnesses. The first the inn knew of the attack was not a shout, but a splintering of wood. A spear tip suddenly punched through the thin paper wall of the bathroom, missing Oryo's face by inches. In that frozen second, steam hanging in the air, the cold reality of the metal point gleaming in the dim light, she understood everything. The silence outside was wrong. The inn was too quiet. They were here for him, and she was naked, weaponless, and utterly alone. In that second, Oryo made a choice that defied every instinct, every rule of self-preservation. She did not scream. She did not sink deeper into the water to hide. Her hand shot out of the water and closed around the wooden shaft of the spear. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she yanked it forward, pulling it completely through the fragile wall, unbalancing the attacker on the other side. In one fluid motion, she was out of the tub, her skin steaming in the cold night air. She grabbed the nearest thing to her, a thin cotton robe used for drying, and wrapped it around herself. It clung to her wet skin. She was naked, armed with nothing but a stolen spear she barely knew how to hold, and between her and the upstairs room stood an unknown number of armed men. She burst out of the bathhouse door into the enclosed garden. The night was silent, but it was a poisoned silence. She could feel them in the shadows. She saw dark shapes moving near the inn's main entrance. Her path to the interior stairs was blocked. Panic rose, a cold wave in her chest. Every fiber of her being, every lesson she'd ever been taught as a woman, screamed at her to find a closet, to barricade herself, to wait for it to be over. She looked up at the second-floor window, the room where he slept. The future of Japan, unwritten, asleep. She took a breath that felt like shards of glass in her lungs, and she ran. Not away, toward. She sprinted across the garden, her bare feet slapping on the cold stones. A shout went up from the side. One of the attackers had seen her, a pale flash in the darkness. She didn't look back. She reached a narrow external staircase, a servant's passage used for deliveries. She took the steps two at a time, the rough wood splintering her feet. At the top was a sliding door that led to the second-floor hallway. She slammed her shoulder against it. It shuddered but didn't give. Locked or barred from the inside. From the garden below, she heard the heavy tread of boots running toward her staircase. She turned, pressing her back against the door, raising the spear. The first attacker's head appeared at the top of the stairs. In the moonlight, she saw the glint of his sword being drawn. There was no technique, no samurai skill. There was only desperation. As he lunged, she thrust the spear forward like a farmer pushing a plow. The point caught him in the shoulder, not a deep wound, but enough to make him cry out and stumble back. The shock of contact traveled up the wooden shaft and into her bones. She had drawn blood. The reality of it nearly made her drop the weapon, but the man's cry was her key. From inside the hallway, she heard a sudden commotion, the sound of someone leaping to their feet. Ryoma, Miyoshi, they were awake. Ryoma-san, she screamed, her voice tearing from her throat, raw and primal. They're here, they're inside. The door behind her flew open. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders and pulled her inside into the dark hallway. It was Miyoshi Shinzo, Ryoma's bodyguard, his own katana already drawn. His eyes were wide, alert, switching from her terrified face to the stairway behind her. Ryoma stood just behind him in the doorway of his room, not in samurai robes, but in a sleeping yukata. He wasn't holding a sword. He was holding a Smith & Wesson Model 2 revolver, a modern American weapon he always kept under his pillow. In that moment, the two Japans faced each other, the katana and the gun, the old world and the new. "How many?" Miyoshi barked, pushing Oryo behind him. "I don't know," she gasped, clutching her robe closed. "The garden, the front, many." Ryoma's face was a mask of calm calculation, but his eyes were fierce. "They've surrounded us. The front is no good." He looked at Oryo, a flash of something profound, gratitude, terror for her, crossing his features. "The back gate, through the storehouse." The plan formed in seconds. They were trapped on the second floor. The main staircase to the first floor would be a death funnel. Their only hope was to go down the way Oryo had come up, fight through the garden, and reach the small back gate that led to the maze of alleyways along the river. Miyoshi would lead, a sword in front. Ryoma would follow with the gun. Oryo, she would be in the middle, unarmed, the most vulnerable. They moved. Miyoshi charged down the external staircase, a battle cry on his lips. The wounded attacker was still there, regrouping. Steel clashed against steel in a shower of sparks. Oryo followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ryoma came last, pausing at the top of the stairs to look back into the inn. From inside, they could hear shouts and the sound of doors being kicked in. The assassins were already searching the rooms. He turned and followed. In the garden chaos, two more attackers emerged from the shadows. Miyoshi engaged one, his swordsmanship a blur of controlled violence. The other saw Ryoma and charged. Ryoma raised the revolver. The crack of the gunshot was obscenely loud in the confined space, a foreign sound that made everyone freeze for a fraction of a second. The attacker crumpled. The gun had bought them a moment, but it had also announced their exact location to every enemy in earshot. "Go now!" Miyoshi yelled, disengaging and sprinting toward a low wooden building at the back of the property, the storehouse. Oryo ran, her bare feet cut and bleeding. Ryoma was right behind her. They crashed through the storehouse door. The air was thick with the salty, pungent smell of pickling plums and miso. Giant ceramic Tsukemono tubs, each as tall as a man and heavier than a bull, lined the walls. And there was the back gate, their escape. It was blocked, not by men but by two of these massive tubs pushed squarely in front of the wooden door. It was a deliberate act. Someone familiar with the inn's layout had sealed their exit. To move them would take two strong men and time, which they did not have. They could hear the pursuers in the garden closing in. Miyoshi put his shoulder against one tub, straining with all his might. It rocked slightly but didn't budge. Despair began to seep into the room. They were cornered. Ryoma turned, ready to make his last stand in the doorway of the storehouse. But Oryo was not looking at the gate. She was looking at the tubs, her mind working with a frightening, clear speed. She remembered. She was a woman who worked here. She knew how these tubs were moved for cleaning, not by brute force from the side, but by rocking them, using their own immense weight and rounded bottom. "Not like that," she said, her voice cutting through the panic. She stepped past Miyoshi, ignoring his shocked look. She placed her hands on the cold, damp ceramic of the nearest tub. "You rock it like a cradle, get it moving, then push with the momentum." She began to push, not straight on, but in a rhythmic rocking motion. Miyoshi, understanding, joined her. Together, they got the 1,000-pound vessel rocking. Back and forth, an inch, then 2, then 6. On the forward swing, they shoved with everything they had. The tub rolled a full foot to the side. They repeated the process, grunting, straining. A sword blade slammed into the doorframe beside them, An attacker was at the storehouse entrance. Ryoma fired again. The man fell back. With one final, heaving effort, they cleared a narrow path to the gate. Miyoshi threw the bolt and shoved the door open. The cool night air of the alleyway rushed in. Freedom. Miyoshi went first, checking the alley. Clear. He waved them through. Oryo pushed Ryoma ahead of her. As she turned to follow, a searing pain shot up her leg. A glancing sword slash from the pursuing attacker had caught her calf. She cried out, stumbled, but kept moving, half falling through the gate. Miyoshi slammed it shut and wedged it with a broken piece of timber from the alley. They ran, a hobbling, desperate sprint through the dark, narrow lanes of Fushimi, heading for the river and the safety of a Satsuma domain ship that was supposedly moored nearby. Blood trickled down Oryo's leg, leaving a trail a child could follow. Ryoma's hands, he would later discover, were badly cut from the frantic close-quarters fighting. They had escaped the Teradea, but they were not safe. The shogunate knew they were here, wounded and on the run. The hunt, which had been a covert operation, was now an open chase. And the woman who had saved the revolution had just made herself the second most wanted person in Japan. The story of the Teradea incident doesn't end with their escape into the alleyways. It begins there, because surviving the attack was one thing. Surviving its aftermath would be another. They found refuge that night aboard a Satsuma clan ship, the Irohamaru Asterisk, hidden in the shadows of the Fushimi docks. The ship's doctor stitched Oryo's leg and bandaged Ryoma's slashed hands. In the cramped captain's quarters, lit by a single swinging lantern, the reality of what had happened settled over them like ash. Atos, the proprietress of the Teradea, was safe. She had hidden during the attack. But the inn was compromised, a smoldering ruin of their former sanctuary. The shogunate's message was clear. No place was safe. No one was beyond reach. For Oryo, the shock was wearing off, leaving behind a cold, hard understanding. By pulling that spear from the wall, by screaming his name, she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She was no longer just Atos's apprentice, a tragic daughter of a purged samurai. She was now an accomplice to treason, a witness the shogunate would gladly silence. Her life, as she knew it, was over. She looked across the small room at Ryoma, who was staring at his bandaged hands, his face pale with pain and concentration. He had not spoken a word of thanks. The weight on him was too great for gratitude. 2 days later, hidden below decks as the ship sailed south, he finally did. He called her to his side. His voice was quiet, hoarse. "Oryo, look at me." She knelt beside his cot. He reached out with one bandaged hand and gently touched her arm. "Because of you," he said, each word deliberate, "I am alive. Because of you, the alliance stands. You did not just save a man. You saved the future of Japan. I am in your debt for as long as I live." It was not a romantic declaration. It was a samurai's oath. And in that moment, something shifted between them. The gentle fondness of the inn was burned away in the fire of the attack, and in its place was a bond forged in blood and survival. They were comrades in arms now, bound by a shared secret that could get them both killed. The ship took them to Kagoshima, the heart of the Satsuma domain, far from the shogunate's direct reach. Here, they were given a small, secluded house near the hot springs. The official story was that Ryoma was recuperating from illness. The truth, known only to a few, was that Japan's most wanted revolutionary and the woman who saved him were lying low, healing their wounds. And it was here, surrounded by volcanic steam and azalea blossoms, that they did something extraordinary for their time. They got married. There was no grand ceremony, no family approval. Both were essentially disowned by the old world. It was a simple, private exchange of vows, witnessed by a trusted Satsuma official. For Ryoma, it was an act of profound commitment and protection. By making Oryo his wife, he gave her his name, a sliver of legitimacy, and tied her fate irrevocably to his own. For Oryo, it was a choice. She could have perhaps faded into obscurity with Atos's help. Instead, she chose the danger, the uncertainty, the man. Historians would later call their trip to Kagoshima one of Japan's first recorded honeymoons. It was less a romantic getaway and more a quiet interlude in a war, a breath drawn before the final plunge. During these weeks, Ryoma wrote letters. His hands healing, he filled page after page with his bold, sprawling script. To his sister Autumn, he wrote the most famous account of the Teradea attack. He detailed the ambush, the fight, the desperate escape. And then he wrote the line that would immortalize Orio's action. Because of this woman, Ryoma's life was saved. It was a stark, powerful statement. He was introducing his new wife to his family not as a beauty or a dutiful woman, but as a hero, as a savior. But the world outside their mountain retreat was not standing still. The failed attack at the Teradea had backfired spectacularly for the shogunate. Instead of silencing Ryoma, it had turned him into a legend. The tale of the daring knight escape, of the low-born samurai and the quick-witted woman who outsmited a squad of assassins, spread through the underground networks of anti-shogunate activists. It was proof of the shogunate's desperation and Ryoma's seemingly charmed life. His credibility soared. The Satsuma Choshu alliance, once a fragile secret, gained an aura of inevitability. The shogunate's response was to double down. The hunt intensified. Prices on Ryoma's head increased. Spies were everywhere. The peaceful interlude in Kagoshima was a mirage, and they both knew it. Ryoma's mind was already churning with the next move. The alliance was military. Now he needed a political blueprint for the new Japan. He began drafting what would be called the 8-Point Program, a visionary document outlining a modern constitutional government under the emperor. He was no longer just a negotiator. He was a founding father, writing a nation into existence from a hiding place. Orio's role evolved. She was no longer just a caregiver. She became his guardian, his extra set of eyes. She learned to watch for suspicious loiterers, to recognize the cadence of a potential informant's questions. She managed their few belongings, always ready to move at a moment's notice. The gentle woman of the Teradea was hardening into a figure of resilient strength. Yet the trauma of that night never left her. She would startle at sudden noises. The smell of blood from a market butcher could make her knees weak. She lived with a constant, low hum of fear, a tax levied on her bravery. Then news came from Kyoto that changed everything. Miyoshi Shinzo, the loyal bodyguard who had fought beside them in the garden, had not been as lucky in his escape. Separated from them in the alleys, he had been hunted down and captured by the shogunate's forces. After a brutal interrogation, he was executed. His head was put on public display as a warning. Ryoma was devastated. Miyoshi was more than a guard. He was a friend, a believer in the cause. His death was a personal loss and a grim reminder of the stakes. The shogunate was cleaning house. They were sending a message: we will kill everyone around him until he is alone. This was the wait it gets worse moment. The danger was no longer just about capture. It was about eradication. The shogunate, feeling its power slip, was becoming openly tyrannical. There would be no more covert raids. The next attempt would be a public, overwhelming force. Ryoma knew time was running out. He had to move his pieces on the board faster than the shogunate could cut them down. In the autumn of 1867, he made a fateful decision. He would return to Kyoto. The political crisis was reaching its peak. The shogun, under immense pressure, had formally announced the return of political authority to the emperor, a move meant to placate the rebels, but one Ryoma saw as the critical opening. He needed to be there in the heart of the maelstrom to shape the transition. It was the most dangerous possible move. Kyoto was a nest of shogunate loyalists, teeming with spies and the dreaded Shinsengumi. It was the lion's den. Orio pleaded with him not to go. For the first time, the strain showed in their relationship. The fear she had held at bay erupted. "They will kill you," she told him, her voice trembling. "Miyoshi was just the beginning. They are waiting for you." Ryoma took her hands. He was calm, resolved. "If I don't go," he said, "everything we have fought for, what you saved that night for, will be for nothing. Someone else will write the future of Japan, and they may not write it well." He saw the terror in her eyes, the memory of the spear through the bathhouse wall. "I have to go," he whispered, "and I need to know you are safe." He arranged for her to stay in a secure, secret location in Kyoto under the protection of a trusted ally. He He would operate from a different safe house, a place called the Amiya. They would be separated for her safety. It was a logical, tactical decision. It also felt like a farewell. On a cold November day, he left for Kyoto. Oryo watched him go, the man who was her husband, her cause, and her greatest terror, walking back into the storm from which she had once pulled him. She had saved him from the blades at the Teradea, but she could not save him from the destiny he was now walking toward. The final act was beginning, and for the first time, she was not by his side. On the evening of December 10, 1867, Sakamoto Ryoma was in the upstairs room of the Amiya, a merchant's house in Kyoto that served as his safe house and office. He was not alone. With him was his friend and fellow activist Nakyaka Shintaro. They were tired but exhilarated. The political tide was turning. The shogun had officially resigned, returning power to the emperor. The revolution Ryoma had plotted, fought for, and nearly died for was on the brink of reality. On the desk between them lay his 8-point program, the blueprint for the new Japan. They were discussing the final details, the last push. For the first time in years, the future felt tangible, close enough to touch. He did not know that a group of armed men from the pro-shogunate Mimawari-gumi police force had surrounded the building. They had been tipped off by a spy. They moved up the stairs silently, their mission a dark echo of the Teradea: eliminate the architect. There was no Oreo this time, no warning scream from a garden, no spear pulled from a wall. The assassins burst into the room. In the close quarters, Ryoma's American revolver was useless. He and Nakyaka drew their swords, fighting back-to-back in a frantic, hopeless struggle. Ryoma was struck down first, a deep cut to the head. Nakyaka fought on, suffering multiple wounds before he too fell. The assassins fled into the night. Sakamoto Ryoma, the revolutionary who had outrun death at the Teradea, died on a tatami mat in Kyoto. He was 31 years old. The news spread through the city like a poison. When it reached Oryo in her separate hiding place, she collapsed. The man she had saved, married, and loved was gone. The future they had built in whispers and hidden rooms was now a ghost. The public reaction, however, was something the assassins did not anticipate. Instead of crushing the rebellion, Ryoma's martyrdom ignited it. His death became the ultimate propaganda tool for the imperial loyalists. Here was the visionary cut down by the desperate, corrupt old guard. His 8-point program was circulated even more widely, becoming a manifesto. The Satsuma Choshu alliance, now fueled by rage and righteousness, marched on Kyoto. The Boshin War began, and within a year the shogunate was overthrown. The Meiji Restoration had begun. Sakamoto Ryoma did not live to see the new Japan, but he had drawn its map. His legacy was secure. He became a folk hero, a symbol of bold change. And what of the woman who made that legacy possible? Oryo's story did not end with Ryoma's death. It descended into a long, quiet tragedy. At 26, she was a widow and a national celebrity, but that fame was a hollow, crushing thing. She had no money. The new Meiji government, built on the ideals her husband championed, offered her no pension, no official recognition. The samurai class was abolished, leaving her without status. She was adrift in the new world she helped create. For a time, she was supported by Ryoma's friends and allies, but their lives moved on. The revolution became a government, and the government had new concerns. In 1875, 8 years after Ryoma's death, she married a merchant named Nishimura Matsu. She took the name Nishimura Tsuru. It was a practical match, an attempt at stability, but the shadow of her first husband was long. Her new life was one of obscure, grinding poverty. She and Nishimura struggled in business. The fiery, quick-witted woman of the Teradea began to fade. Then the final, cruel twist. Oryo, the heroine who had faced down assassins with a spear, succumbed to alcoholism. It was a slow, private unraveling. The trauma of that night in the bathhouse, the loss of Ryoma, the weight of a history that celebrated him but forgot her, it all found its outlet in the bottle. She died on January 15, 1906, at the age of 64. She died as she had lived for decades, in obscurity and poverty. There were no grand ceremonies, no government officials. The woman who saved the revolution was buried in a simple grave, her story nearly lost to time. but history has a way of circling back. In the decades that followed, as Japan modernized and Ryoma's legend grew into a national myth, people began to ask, who was the woman in the story? The one who warned him. Slowly, Orio's name re-emerged from the footnotes. Historians pieced together her life. The Teradea Inn was preserved as a museum. Today, you can visit the very room where Ryoma slept, see the bathhouse where Orio bathed, and stand in the garden where she ran. Tour guides tell her part of the story with reverence. She is no longer just a footnote. She is an essential part of the legend. And here is the surprising, poignant detail that completes the loop. After Ryoma's death, among his few personal effects, Orio kept one thing: his favorite pair of **, his wooden sandals. They were not a sword or a document or a piece of jewelry. They were the shoes of a man who was always on the move, who walked Japan into a new age. In her years of poverty, through her second marriage and her struggles, she held on to them. It was the most intimate of relics. Not the revolutionary's tool, but the man's footwear. A reminder of the feet that walked away from the Teradea because of her. She kept them until she died. So what is the true payoff of the Teradea incident? It is not just that a nation was changed. It is that in one flash of courage, a woman who had lost everything to the old world reached out and grabbed the spear of the new one. She acted not for fame or glory, but because it was right. Her reward was a lifetime of hardship, but her legacy is immortality. Sakamoto Ryoma built modern Japan. But on a cold March night, it was Narasaki Ryo, barefoot and brave in her cotton robe, who made sure he lived to build it. The revolution had its swords and its treaties. But first, it had a scream in a hallway, a choice in the steam, and a love that was stronger than fear. History books are written by the victors, but they are often made by the quiet, the unseen, the ones who move without a title. We remember Sakamoto Ryoma's name because his ideas shaped institutions. We build statues to the architects, but the Teradea incident asks us to look closer at the fragile human moment upon which the grand architecture of history sometimes balances. Orio's story is not one of trained heroism. It is a story of reflexive humanity. She did not calculate the geopolitical impact of saving Ryoma. In the steam of that bathhouse, she calculated only this: a good man was in danger and she could do something. Her courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That is the most accessible, the most powerful kind of bravery there is. It is the kind available to anyone, in any hallway, in any life. And so her legacy is dual. It is specific. She is the reason the Meiji Restoration had its visionary. But it is also universal. She is proof that a single action taken without permission or precedent can alter the flow of time. We celebrate the Ryomas of the world, the thinkers, the leaders, the faces on the currency. But we must learn to listen for the Orios, for the scream in the hallway, for the person who, when the moment demands, simply decides to be the one who moves. Her life after the spotlight faded reminds us that history is rarely fair. Glory and gratitude are fleeting. The world moved on and she was left with the memories and the scars. But fairness is not the point of her story. Significance is. Her significance is etched not in the stone of a monument, but in the very existence of modern Japan. You cannot tell the story of the nation's rebirth without the chapter set in a Fushimi Inn, where the future was defended not with a policy paper, but with a wet robe and a warning shout. So the next time you hear a tale of great men and epic turns, pause. Look for the woman in the background. Look for the servant, the clerk, the friend, the stranger. Look for the one who offered the cloak, who passed the message, who held the door, who said the words that changed a mind. History is a tapestry, and the brightest threads are often held by the quietest hands. Orio's final lesson is this: you do not need a title to change your world. You need only the courage to see what needs to be done and the will to do it. In a world that often feels too large to influence, remember the weight of a single human moment. Remember the bathhouse. Remember the spear. Remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to plan the revolution, but to save the revolutionary. Thank you for watching. If you found the story of the girl in the robe who rescued a nation compelling, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the forgotten figures who shaped our world. We'll see you in the next one.